Hello and welcome everyone to the Movement Made Better podcast. Today we are very excited to have our friend on, Blake Gourley. Blake, I'll turn it over to you to give a little introduction to yourself, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Dennis reached out on Sunday and I was really excited because I actually turned to my girlfriend and I was like, oh man, I got invited to be on this podcast. I've seen what they've been doing. It looks really high quality. So I'm excited to be involved and come on with you guys. And it's already been fun chatting with you guys. Yeah, just a little background on me. I ended up rowing 4 years in high school and then I got recruited to Cal. And that's kind of where a lot of my background started. And I was fortunate enough to be recruited, but what ended up happening was my first semester, I had a back injury that, to be honest, it was my decision to stop rowing, but it was also just so painful in so many different ways that it wasn't worth it to me. Like, I remember my coach being like, I know people who have this injury and you can come back. And I just remember 5 months straight seeing 5 different doctors and every single position just being painful. And I think a lot of it was just kind of a mental fear of how do I return and can I return without this pain? And looking back at pictures of how I rode, it's pretty clear why I ended up tearing up my back. So I had spondy at L5S1 and then a bunch of slip discs. But anyway, it was it's pretty obvious now. And basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to become the person that I needed at that time, right? So I didn't know that at the time, but got injured, finished school at Cal, and then got into rowing coaching. So I coached high school rowing for 9 years. And then I was kind of running my personal training business on the side, and it just ended up growing so much that I had to make a decision. So I had to go with personal training in my business, or I had to go with coaching. And it was a really hard decision, but I chose to go with personal training. And the connection of the two in my experience is kind of what sets me apart in terms of having the specialty with rowing, because I'm able to speak coach to the rowers. And to the coaches. So I do things that are specific to the sport of rowing, but again, it comes down to we're all humans, right?
Yeah.
And it just comes down to understanding what we need and what that individual needs. But yeah, so I basically got a bunch of certifications. I got my master's degree in sports performance and have just been studying and practicing and trying to, my passion is to help rowers specifically who have back pain or who are trying to avoid back pain. But, 50% of my clientele are general population as well.
How old were you when you took up the sport?
Started rowing my freshman year.
Oh, okay. I was really, I think we were both really surprised. It was hard to get an actual amount of people that do competitive rowing, but I think we were both surprised at how many people are competitive rowers. It's a bigger demographic than we thought.
Yeah, it's a growing sport, and especially with the popularity of erging and being able to row on the rowing machine on your own. I think that's also helping it grow for sure. But yeah, then you kind of have the two demographics. You have the people who do it for exercise. Mm-hmm. You have the people who do it competitively on land, and then you have the people who take it to the water. And there's a lot of similarities, but a few differences as well.
So looking back at your injury from your, you said you looked at your movement pattern and why you had the injury. Was it because of certain physical limitations that you rode that way? Or was it something you think you could have fixed just through technique?
I think it's multiple. So I think one of the cool things that I was able to do when I was coaching for 9 seasons was I did the functional movement screen on 120 athletes every year. So I have this just pile of data, and we know that it doesn't tell us everything, but it gives us a good idea. A big common trend is that people who have bad active straight leg raises, specifically asymmetrical or one, they tend to be at a higher risk of a back injury or pain. Right? It's kind of common sense. So I think my active straight leg raise is pretty bad. And I remember seeing the pictures of me rowing, and I just had a super round C lumbar spine. Some of that is how certain rowing coaches coach. So some rowing coaches, they want you to have a C spine.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
And then when you drive and you initiate that press off the foot plate, you actually arch even more through that lumbar spine. So I think I was doing that for 4 years in high school. And then I got recruited to Cal, who at the time, they were undefeated national champions. Oh. So they were at the highest level. So I got recruited to a very, very high level. I don't think I rode super well. I don't think I had great hip mobility. And then they also swapped my side.
Oh.
So for 4 years, I was rotating to the left.
Wow. Okay.
And then at the highest level I'd ever been, they swapped me to the other side.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, the torque, you're used to torque on one direction, and then all of a sudden it's like, your body's molded that way, and then boom.
Yeah. I still have asymmetries from rowing.
Wow.
Like I'm still not right. So yeah, I could imagine 4 years on one side and then switching to the other. That's probably a big part of it. So
because you're talking about singular rowing versus people that are doing both sides simultaneously. So what's those are two different distinctive applications of rowing.
Yeah. So there's sculling and then there's sweep.
Okay.
So sculling is when you have 2 oars.
Okay.
And then sweep is when you have 1. So sculling, it's interesting because it's a little bit better on your body because there's not that rotation to one side. And people tend to specialize like I did, like 4 years on one side.
Okay.
But it's also heavier. It's also a heavier stroke because the size of the boat and the weight of the boat, and it's only you. So based on the size of the boat and how many people are in it determines the weight of the stroke. So yeah, it's better for you in terms of like mechanics, but it's a heavier load. So that's sculling. And then sweep is rotational. So you have 1 oar. It's a big oar. You put your entire load on it. It tends to be bigger boats. And yeah, you just crank around that axis over and over and over again. We put in so many strokes. Excuse me.
Well, let's say typically what's a practice session duration wise?
Yeah, so most practices will be 3 hours.
Oh.
It depends on the program. So let me get more background there. When I was rowing in high school, it was 3-hour practices 5 to 6 days a week.
Damn.
And that's pretty normal. And then sometimes there'll be double days. And then in college, there was double days and practices were an hour and a half each time. But we'd usually get like 1 day off, like Sunday you'd get off. But it's really high intensity. It's really high volume.
Yeah.
And it's the same pattern back to back to back.
And now strength training program wise, what was that set up like?
In high school, there was nothing. My coach 1 year grabbed my arms and was like, "You need to lift." I'm like, okay, what's that mean?
Like lift what?
So I remember like getting a membership at the local gym, and it's like we bench pressed.
Okay.
And I don't know what else we did. We bench pressed. I remember that. That's like all we knew. And then college, it was like 2 days a week in the mornings. The strength coach was good. I liked him. He was a good guy. Don't think he really understood the sport though. So it ended up being really high volume weights, which I don't think rowers need.
Yeah. All right.
When you were in college, were you training different based on your position too? Like if you're right side, left side, were they?
Yeah. No, good question, but no. And I would say from what I've heard about Cal now, like in the last 5 years or so, because I know people that go there, their weights is optional. And I know when I interned at Stanford, I worked with men's rowing, but it was also optional. And I maybe worked with a male rower like once while I was at Stanford for that 6-month period. So some teams believe that you don't need weight training. They're like, we get enough in the boat. It's resistance training. That's all we need. So it's a little behind the times in that sense, but it's not everywhere.
What are some of the best exercises that you implement with your rowing clients?
If we take a step back a little bit. So for me, I always look at like, who am I getting? Like, who is a rower, right? Like, and I feel like looking at the type of athlete that they are, they tend to be tall and lean. And with that, they tend to be pretty uncoordinated. And I'll say that because I've been through this and I know a lot of people who are like me, not talking down to anyone. And then they also have this mentality that it's all about hard. Just how hard can I work? How hard can I work? How hard work can I work? How many times can I say that? And so what you realize is like you have to choose things based off of that, right? And then you have the demands of the sport. So you have the high volume, you have the weight of the stroke. So the weight of the stroke based on research ranges from like 56 to 166 pounds per stroke.
Oh, damn.
And of course, that's a wide range. Like I said, singles or sculling, that's a little bit heavier, right? And it depends on, who's in your boat, how big the boat is and all that. And then there's different parts of the race. So the beginning's heavy, middle is a little bit lighter, and then the end is a little bit lighter too, because you're just bumping the rate up and going as fast as you can. So you have the weight of the stroke, and then the most common important races are 2,000 meters. So it's like 200 strokes at that weight. And then you need enough mobility at the ankles, at the hips, at the T-spine, and then you need enough stability to be able to transfer that force without kind of getting that bend in the spine, for example, or getting an injury. And then I look at the research, and it's like, injury rates are 32 to 51% annually. Wow. Low back pain, 82% a year. And then in terms of like performance measures, the research is like, you need height, you need limb length, can't change those. You need lower body strength. You need lower body power. You need grip strength. Grip strength has actually been correlated. That's kind of interesting if we want to go there at all. Rowing specific power. So like, how much power can I produce in the boat or on the rowing machine? And then obviously like a high level of fitness. So I kind of take like all of those into the picture in terms of choices. But maybe if you looked at my program, you would be like, oh, that's pretty basic.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So like getting into exercises, if we start with like hip dominant, I love trap bar deadlifts.
Yes.
And that's because they tend to be long. They tend to not be able to deadlift well from the floor. Like a lot of rowers can't get into a good position from the floor. And then just the change in the shearing load, because the weight of the stroke is already producing a very high shearing load. So I don't think they need to do that with a barbell deadlift. So I always go trap bar for that. And then in terms of like a single leg hip dominant, love SLDLs, single leg deadlifts, mostly because of pelvic control. And it teaches them to get a better, like tall hip hinge rock over at the beginning of the catch. And like you guys know, with weightlifting, it's all about the setup. If they don't get into a good starting position, the rest is ruined. So to me, that's the setup in the rowing, on the rowing machine or as a rower. Rock forward tall, get that body set in a good position, make sure that you can tilt at the pelvis. I don't think you learn that without the SLDL. And I love your guys' airplanes and helicopters. You guys taught me that one, and I use that all the time, and it tends to help rowers a lot.
Because that just helps strengthen their whole hip capsule in all three planes of motion, right?
Yeah. So like a lot of people think rowing is a bilateral sport, which it is. Yeah. But it's also very asymmetrical because of the rotational forces. Even sculling, even two oars, it's very rotational. You have side bending, and then you're in a boat. So you're doing this all the time. So it's about being able to control the pelvis in all planes, right? So I love airplanes and helicopters for that. And I've seen a lot of people who haven't been able to get into a good position. And I've done things in addition. There's other things as well, but airplanes and helicopters are one of the ways of me improving their hips and pelvic position that transferred over to the stroke. So I love that. So thank you for that.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, awesome.
And I just read a study on hip motion and how it impacts rowing performance, and this kind of like reaffirmed my belief, but also reminded me like how important pelvic positioning and pelvic control is. So what they found is that the people who were able to consistently reproduce the same motion at the hip under a full effort 2K, full effort row, they were the ones that had the best performance. So I think from an injury standpoint and from a performance standpoint, if we can really train someone to not only be able to possess the prerequisite mobility at the hips and the pelvis, if they can control that under fatigue and under different loads and different movements, I think that is going to transfer over to the sport more than almost anything.
Because do you find that most people think you're trying to dominate with the shoulders on that rowing motion? Because I think we see it a lot on ergs in the gyms, right?
Yeah, a lot of people think it's an upper body exercise. Like I can't tell you how many times people ask me what sport I played. And I'd be like, I was a rower. And they're like, oh, you must have a really big upper body. I'm like, well, you're looking at me and I don't. And rowers kind of take offense to it because they're like, no, this is a lower body sport. Like we're all about having strong legs. We never skip leg day. Like we're proud of having strong legs. So yeah, if you do it correctly and you have enough stability to be able to transfer the force from the upper body to the lower body, then you can be really, really powerful. But yeah, looking at the machines in the gym, like people always have it cranked up to 10, which makes it as heavy as possible. Rowers tend to row around to 3.
Oh, really?
So it's like people are already kind of making it like a strength training exercise when it's not supposed to be. There's that misconception for sure.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
You were talking about measuring leg strength as part of a performance indicator. So how would you do that? Because you got is it a squat, a single leg squat?
I typically do a deadlift, and I'll kind of base the choice of the deadlift based on the individual. So preferably just trap bar deadlift. And I ended up testing like a max 5 rep just to kind of see where they're at. Okay. Historically, I haven't tested the squat the same way. Like I still think it's important. I still think it's part of the equation. But when I'm testing lower body strength, I'm looking at trap bar.
On the squat, are you typically doing front loaded or back loaded?
Good question. I only do front loaded.
Okay.
Yeah. So kind of the same thought process with the trap bars, just the shearing load is so high that they don't need all that extra compression on their spine. And it also really works with the sport. So in the sport, you rock forward, you get a forward body angle, and then you drive from the front end, and you're trying not to lose that angle that you had from the beginning. What ends up happening is people will either collapse, they'll fall forward into the front end, or they won't get enough angle. So I find that a lot of times just adding some load to the front gets them that extra core engagement to teach them the proper position in the stroke. So I like it for that reason as well. I almost always use the Dumphy squat as the first one in terms of like teaching that, because a lot of, like I said earlier, like a lot of rowers, like they don't have a high level of coordination. So they need help understanding how to create tension. So that's been really valuable too.
Well, because the longer being short, it took me a long time to understand what someone at 6'5" has to deal with, vastly different than myself at 5'3". And so I think a lot of coaches kind of overlook that.
I could say I'm still uncoordinated, but I would say until I interned at Mike Boyle's, I was uncoordinated. And the reason I know that for sure is that they make the interns go through everything, speed agility drills, like every single thing before you teach it. You have to experience it, which I agree with. And I had to stay after like 2 days in a row because I had no idea how to skip. I had no idea how to do like any agility work. Like it was embarrassing. I was like, I can't teach this. I can't even perform it myself. But
you show some of the video.
Yeah, I know, right? What we have to do as older strength coaches. But yeah, what I found is like, I obviously learned and I developed it, and I was way more coordinated and I was way stronger, or at least I felt way stronger. And I find that a lot of the rowers that come to me, they don't even know how to skip. Like they can't do that cross diagonal pattern. So like even at the most basic level, just teaching them how to first march the correct way and then skip the correct way is huge. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but like, the person that can't skip tends to be the person that has like a really poor reflexive core. Oh,
good call. Yeah, very true.
So like anytime I can get them to skip, also I start to see changes in terms of like how their core responds and like the push up improves. So like even at the very basic level, getting them to skip and do like lateral movement, they hate it. And they're like, why is this important? But it's so good for them to like actually be an athlete and not just so narrowly focused.
You feel like that gives them a better sense of, when the changes in the boat happen, you're talking about all the different rotational lateral forces that they can stabilize a little bit quicker.
Yeah, I think that's important because like we could talk all day about like, okay, get tight before you pick up the weight of the stroke. But like, are they going to be able to do that under fatigue? How much energy are they losing by like creating that much tension? And then there's also like the thin balance between having too much tension in your sport, right? Like,
yes,
there's so many technical components where you have to be like light and controlled and precise with your hands. And if I'm teaching them to like grip the handle and break the handle and create all this tension before they change directions, it's going to take away from their sports performance too. So yeah, I always prefer that we get to the point where it's reflexive. Does it always happen? no, that's always the goal.
So talking about grip strength there, when you're holding the oar, do you want it in your fingertips? Or not fingertips, but like, kind of loose in the fingers, or do you want that thumb around it too?
Yeah. So the thumb will be around it, but there's kind of a hang. So I'm kind of like hanging here.
Okay.
Hopefully people are watching and not listening. So you're kind of hanging on it. It's not like a tight grip. It's a loose grip. And then sculling, it's even more of a hang. And then with sculling, you actually turn the oar like this. So you like roll your fingers to turn the oar, which is a whole nother component.
Yeah.
And then with sweep, you're doing this to turn the oar.
Oh, like you're revving a motorcycle.
Like you're revving a motorcycle. Yeah. Oh, I kind of thought that was the same with sculling. So that's a massive difference. That's a lot of technique. Oh, that'd be take a long time to learn that technique.
Yeah. I rode in a single, so 2 oars for the first time in probably like 15 years because of COVID. And I was trying to do this. I was trying to rev and start that motor. And by the end, my wrists were so sore for like 2 days because that's not how you're supposed to do it, but that's all I knew. So yeah, it's a big difference. And I'm a rowing coach and I know better.
So, it's the nuances. So it's not just muscling it and gripping it and cranking on it. It's the subtleties that a lot of people overlook.
Yep, absolutely.
But that max grip strength is a big component as your performance measure, right?
Yeah. So research has proven that, and then my personal experience has as well. So probably the last 2 or 3 years that I was coaching, that same 120 athletes or so, I was getting their grip strength every couple of days, and I was just kind of like seeing like, does this show me anything? And I was looking at it from more of a monitoring. If I could monitor their readiness. That's kind of how I was approaching it. Are there big dips? Are there big rises? Do I see any like performance relationship? And the cool thing is that I was doing this even as I transitioned out. So like the last season that I transitioned out, there was a lot of athletes I didn't know because I wasn't there anymore. I wasn't there in person. So I was kind of blind to everything besides the data I was being given. And what I found was that the top performers persistently had the highest grip strength. I actually, without knowing the athletes, I actually predicted who the top lineup would be for all teams. And the only time I missed someone, I missed like 1 or 2. The only time I missed them, they had dropped out. They weren't in the sport anymore.
Oh, gotcha. Oh.
So if I just look at grip strength, and then if I look at movement as well, I have a better prediction, but grip strength seems to be the biggest predictor of rowing performance.
So did the people with the highest grip strength have the heaviest trap bar deadlifts too?
So yes and no. So there's like some of them are tall, some of them are short, some of them are heavy, some of them are light. So there doesn't seem to be a direct correlation there. And then yes, all of them were strong, but they didn't have the highest numbers.
Okay.
It wasn't like the top 8 was the top 8 deadlifts. In my opinion, you guys will have to tell me what you think, because I think this is pretty interesting. In my opinion, I think grip strength is tied to our nervous system, right? Yeah. So I think it's about a body alignment. I think it's about being healthy, and I think it's about being strong. I think that's kind of what it's telling us.
Yeah, I would agree. Think? Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I know they use grip strength for that nervous system measure for a bunch of different sports. So do you think though, because rowing is very grip intensive, like if you were to test them, on a day that they just rowed for, 3 hours, did that have a big effect on their numbers?
Yeah, maybe not the answer you're looking for, but I think I actually screwed up a few times, and like sometimes they would squeeze it and they would like throw out their grip. And they like hurt their hand. Like,
oh shit!
maybe I'm testing a little too often. But in terms of like the readiness thought process, and sorry Neil if I'm not answering your question. The other cool thing that we saw was that like if you saw like a big dip, and I forget exactly what we considered a big dip, maybe like 10 pounds or something. When you'd see a big dip, sometimes you wouldn't know that person was like starting to need time for recovery or starting to like feel like they're running into the ground. So what we would do is we would be like, okay, go check in with this athlete. And we just go in, we'd have a conversation with them. We wouldn't say why we're checking in. And almost every single time they'd be like, oh, like my mom and dad are in a fight. I didn't sleep last night. or like I have midterms coming up and like I'm really stressed out. So that was super interesting to see like what I thought it might do kind of come to fruition. And then again, there's that season where I was doing it where I didn't see anyone. And the coaches were telling me like, wow, that's crazy. Like this guy had this problem going on. And like they wouldn't have thought to have that conversation if they hadn't seen the difference or that drop in grip.
Fascinating. Because I mean, you talked about the heavy row versus at the mid and end where it's a lighter. You're talking about how much water can you push, right, or pull through, or how much water you're grabbing.
So it's kind of like you're at a dead stop at the beginning of the race. So you try to build that boat speed. So at first it's like super, super heavy. So like throughout the race, at the beginning it's heavy, gets lighter in the middle because you have that momentum, and then you go really fast. You just bring up the cadence at the end, and then it gets lighter, right?
Okay.
And then you have throughout the stroke. So like the beginning of the stroke is heavy. Right when I put the blade in the water and I initiate, that's heavy. But my goal is to always accelerate. My goal is to always make it fly into my chest. So it's not a hard pull into my chest. It's so much power from my legs and that effective transfer and swing from my upper body that it flies into my chest. And a lot of times people will have bruises on their chest.
Oh, shit. Damn.
I don't know if that's a good thing, but that shows you how fast it'll fly in.
That's a lot of power.
Or a little armor there.
Wear a little chest, wear a little pad. Do people wear pads? No, I don't think so.
I haven't seen it unless they did it under their shirt and I didn't notice. But
and I know one of the things is when people want to use a rower at the gym, if you had to advise them on what some of the major points or pieces of advice you'd give them to think about when they start or when they're there.
So first it's about getting the feet right. So you know how you can adjust the feet up and down? You have the different holes. So you want that to be low enough that it allows them to get into a good position. So a lot of people will go up high and then it requires more ankle mobility, and most people don't have a ton of ankle mobility. So making sure that is in a good position. So you want that basically as low as you can go, as long as the strap goes right over your shoelaces.
Okay.
So you don't want to, like, it depends on the person's feet. Like I can go lower because my feet are a little bit bigger. Someone's smaller, even though they have like poor ankle mobility, you would want to take them all the way to the bottom. But if you did that, their foot would pop out of the strap. So it's kind of restricted. So first get the feet right. I would set the damper between 3 and 4. So the fan setting between 3 and 4. Again, because like we talked about earlier, I don't think it's a strength training movement. I think it's conditioning. I think it's about that acceleration and speed. And maybe that's just a rowing purist kind of thing. But yeah, keeping that lighter. It's a little harder to learn at first when you have it lighter because you don't have as much resistance. So like if you want to kind of teach people to find connection, you can change that fan speed a little bit, go a little bit higher, but you have to be careful because it ends up overloading a lot of people when you have a high fan speed. And then kind of what we talked about earlier is like the setup. So when I'm at the back end, can I hip hinge and swing forward without rounding my spine? And then from there, it's just, can I control and hold that angle to the front? In terms of changing directions on the drive, as soon as I start pushing, make it your focus to keep it as smooth as possible. It's the difference between someone deadlifting with no tension and just yanking it off the floor. And it's the difference between someone having full tension, engagement, and then driving. So you almost want to take your deadlift and make it your rowing stroke.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So when you say no rounding of the spine at all, are you saying more lumbar, or you don't want any thoracic rounding at all?
I mean, in the most ideal situations, I as little flexion as possible. Okay. Most people can't do that. I think what it ends up being, and this happens in the sport of rowing as well, is as little lumbar as possible.
Okay.
And then as much thoracic as you need. Right. But I think where it gets really dangerous is just the change in position.
Okay.
So like, yes, extra flexion is dangerous, but it's more about the micro changes, or like that lack of tension and that pickup and crack in terms of how that spine moves. So like a lot of people I'll see that have back pain, they'll get that like additional bend every time they pick up the weight of the stroke.
Is there, as far as where to push off on the foot or on the feet, is there any specific sequencing that you would recommend?
Yeah. So allow yourself to roll up onto the ball of your foot. Ideally, it's not excessive. Ideally, it's like no bigger than a tennis ball.
Okay.
So roll up onto the ball of your foot. And then I want to press off the ball of the foot. And as soon as I can, I want to get my heels down. And then once I have my heels down, I'm trying to press through the entire foot. And then once I get to the finish, I want to push my toes into the foot plate. And if you really concentrate on pushing your toes into the foot plate, and really the entire foot, but more focus on the toes, is you'll feel your core engage and you'll be in a better position at that other side.
So your legs should be in full extension then.
Yeah, legs will be fully extended. And ideally, you're thinking about keeping pressure against that foot plate. A lot of times people will pop on and off.
Yeah.
Really bad for technique, but it also, like, you lose your core, you lose your connection. Right? Same way you think about like rooting into the floor with your feet. We often say, like, imagine there's $100 bill under your feet.
Wow.
If you drop it, you don't get it.
People push the shit out of that plate now. You got to give people the right motivation sometimes. And sometimes that's what it takes. You can make a correlation like that and people actually get it then. That's a great one. That's very good.
One time we actually brought dollar bills. We weren't that rich. We brought dollar bills and like put it under the kids' feet. And these are high school kids. And they're like, anything I have to do to get that dollar.
Just put a little glue on my shoe there.
That's a good one.
So what about strokes per minute?
In terms of recommendations for people?
Yeah.
I say variety. So obviously start low. I always like to teach and learn between 16 and 20. So pretty slow, which is also going to make it a little heavier, which is also going to help you find that connection. And then once you find that connection at that lower speed, you can start to add higher rates. So I'll usually go 16 to 20 and then 20 to 24. So basically in increments of 4. In terms of like rowers, they're now competing at like 40 and higher.
Whoa.
which is really, really fast.
Damn.
That's really fast.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that for general population.
Yeah, no way.
Oh my goodness.
Maybe like high 30s, 34 maybe. But yeah, you don't want to push it too far past that.
I picked a concept 2 rower up last year, probably right around this time. And I'll mainly use it and kind of look at my heart rate. So, and I'll pay attention a little bit to the strokes per minute, and I'm probably hanging out at like 23 to 25. And I'm kind of going just more of a steady pace for about 20 minutes or so.
That's a smart place to be. And I know a coach that actually designed like a whole chart based off of rates. And he says that, like, these rates are aerobic, these rates are anaerobic, etc. And he kind of has that drawn out. Of course, there's some limitations to that, but yeah, in general, if you're just going for like a longer aerobic stimulus, keeping it lower is going to make more sense. And then if you want to get anaerobic, you can spike it.
Yeah,
but you can make it anaerobic by just going really hard at a rate 16.
Yes. Yeah. Breathing sequencing. We're inhaling as we go into the flexion, exhaling on the pull.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the cool part about that is the research actually shows that if you do that 1-to-1 pattern that you just described, inhale on the way up, exhale on the push. If you do that and you challenge yourself, at least to the point where you can actually successfully achieve it, because sometimes your heart starts going too fast and you can't do it anymore. If you can do that at your challenging point, right at that cutoff, and you can do that for, 20 minutes, it actually improves your lung capacity. Just thinking about how you control that breathing while you're doing that work. And then rowers in general breathe at a competitive rate at like 2.5 breaths per stroke. So it basically ends up being like, but I don't try to teach people to fall into that pattern, because it's really tricky, and it almost ends up, you almost like feel like you're out of control.
Okay.
So it's more of like, take as many breaths as you need, exhale on the drive. Take as many breaths as you need, exhale on the drive. Because I think when we're exhaling on the drive, and especially if we're making a sound or like a shh noise when we exhale on the drive, we're automatically engaging our core.
Right?
Yes. We need that stability. We need that core set around our spine. I like to teach, like, make a shh noise right off the drive, and then I actually put this video out today. If you think about making the shoe sound to the speed of your drive, it gives you live feedback of how fast you're driving. So are you getting that acceleration? How is your drive speed? And then you have that live feedback. So it's like, shh, shh, if I want to pick it up, shh, shh, right?
Oh.
So if I give myself that live feedback, not only am I getting the benefits of that brace and that breathing pattern, but now I'm also able to adjust and remind myself if I'm starting to drop off or if I need to pick up my drive speed. And that's more important for rowers specifically because drive speed is very closely connected to 2K performance. But yeah, in general, make a noise on the drive, breathe in on the recovery.
So are you focusing on breathing in through the nose and then exhaling through the mouth, or have you messed around with just nasal breathing only?
I mean, I would love to do that for as long as possible, but I don't know how long you can do that. That'd be an interesting challenge. I want to see you do it, Neil. You're probably a beast at that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to try.
That's what I've been trying to do is just only nasal breathing when I row. And I don't row fast. What's a good test to see what your anaerobic capacity is on a rower?
I like the 10 stroke max test. So basically it's kind of complicated to do because the monitor doesn't allow you to set it to 10 strokes and doesn't allow you to set it to like 10 seconds. But basically what you do is you choose like a slightly higher fan setting. I wouldn't say 10, but maybe 5, 6. And then you just from a dead stop, the fan is not moving. Mm-hmm. From a dead stop, you just go 10 strokes as hard as you can and try to see what your peak power is. The thing, since you can't set the monitor, the thing is you want to like record the monitor. You need someone watching you so that you actually see your peak unless you can remember. But the more info you have, the better. So you can kind of like break it down. Simplest way is you look for your highest peak power. And that's been correlated in the research to anaerobic power and performance.
What I want to ask next is on the finish, we've pushed through the legs. Should there be retraction of the scaps on the finish, or is that more just pulling in with the anterior arm line?
I say ideally and for health, yes. I think when it gets into like practical race situations where people are competing, just like all other competitions, it kind of goes out the window, right? Yeah. Like ideally you're getting that proper movement, that proper form and that squeeze. But if someone's trying to win and they're going as fast as they can, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
So for just the average person that wants the cardiovascular benefits of rowing, then try to retract the scapula when you get back there.
Yeah. I mean, you want to stay healthy as long as possible. You're not trying to win a race. So every mechanic that you know should probably be replicated on the rowing stroke. Every good mechanic you know.
Fantastic. Where can people get a hold of you on or your social media, get in contact with you?
Yeah, at Rowing Strength on Instagram is where I'm most active. And then Blake at rowingstrength.com. If you have any emails, I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah, it's a good place.
Do you have any projects coming up here or anything you're working on?
Too many.
List them all.
That's a good thing, bro.
All of them.
If you got a lot, that's a good thing.
So I'm working on my second rowing book.
Oh, very nice.
I don't know when that will be finished just because it's kind of getting pushed to the back burner with everything else. And then I recently picked up the Science of Rowing project. So it's me and these two other strength coaches. We've been working together for a while, and we basically pick a research article every month, and we just go over what it means to us from a practical standpoint, and can we put it into use? And then we share that with the rowing community. So Science of Rowing is kind of my biggest project right now. It's really fun, but it is time consuming.
So is that a website there that you have?
Yes, scienceofrowing.com. And then we're also on Instagram as well, Science of Rowing.
Very nice.
But yeah, that's seems to be way more interesting to like actual rowers because that's kind of our main target. So, but check it out if you're interested.
Actually, one last another question too. I forgot to ask. Recovery wise, after somebody's been spending an exponential amount of time rowing, as far as from a reversing the effects of rowing, is there anything specific that you do as far as stretching wise or opening up other lines?
I love to hang. I like to side bend. So like the bow and arrow with stick mobility. I think a lot of rowers need that and respond well to that. I remember when you guys taught me that, I was like, oh my gosh, is that what I'm supposed to feel like? I'd never done a stretch for my lateral line. Never.
Yeah, I don't think most people have. Yeah.
And you're right, like getting that interior line. So like ideally like hanging and arching open. I'm not sure what that's called.
Your monkey hangs. Yeah.
Monkey hangs.
Yeah.
So I like those too. And obviously like hip flexors get super tight. Quads get super tight. So honestly, just doing like a kneeling box quad with tension with a stick like that. That's a pretty common one. Yeah, those are the big ones.
Then you're probably a big fan of doing a lot of exercises out of the half kneeling position.
Yeah, especially now that I'm a little bit more focused on pelvic positioning. Right, so just challenging that pelvis in different positions. Yeah, so chops, lifts, different stretches, presses. Yeah, I try to change the position pretty often.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for coming on, Blake. We appreciate it, man. We were excited to have you on, and we look forward to having you on in the not too distant future, brother.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
All right, buddy. And to all our listeners out there, we appreciate you dropping in, giving a listen. And until next episode, be good to each other.